Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Dojo Live this Thursday, March 23rd, 2023. My name is Kim Lantis, and it's my pleasure to be hosting today, along with Ancora's Jorge Hernandez. Hey, Jorge.
Hi, Kim. Thank you for having me
Yes,
back as a
no,
co-host.
yes, great to have you here with me once again. And it's always a pleasure because Jorge is a machine learning engineer, and he's great because today's show might get a little technical, and I need that help because we're here talking with Michael Puscar, who is the co-founder and CTO at NPCX. This is also a return here on Dojo Live. It's been a while, I think around 3 years or so. Great to have you again, Michael.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm really excited. Always a great conversation here.
Yes, thank you, and all the way from Colombia. It's great. Perfect. So today's topic is really about gaming, and not just gaming, the future of gaming, as well as the realism that that implies. But before we dive too much into that topic, I'd like to get to know you a bit better, Michael. What's your story? What's kind of your passion, and what's led up to what NPCX is doing?
Well, great. Thanks again for having me on. So my name is Michael Puscar. I'm a co-founder and CTO of NPCX. I'm a serial entrepreneur, investor, but really my passion is technology. My background's in data science. I have 3 patents in the area of neural networks and natural language processing, specifically language models, which we know is all the rage these days with ChatGPT. It's all anyone ever wants to talk to me about these days.
For sure.
I am coming to you from the Andes Mountains in Colombia. I was actually invited to come here 10 years ago. No, sorry, 12 years ago by the mayor of Medellin at the time. They were looking to bring entrepreneurs and investors in, and like many people who came to Colombia, I came, fell in love with the country, and basically stayed. And I've been part of the ecosystem ever since.
Nice. And of course, habla español.
Sí, español, italiano y chino y inglés.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so that was Spanish, Italian, Chinese, and English. So Michael,
That's
I don't
right.
even know. What do you call people who are bilingual, trilingual, quadlingual? I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, I don't know what it is either. It's
I love it. I love it. So let's talk about, serial entrepreneur, but currently that means NPCX. Who is NPCX and what is the problem that you're solving today?
So NPCX is a company that's using artificial intelligence to create more realism in video games and in animated film as well. Interesting story. I think it's a pretty common story for founders. I background in artificial intelligence and machine learning, as we talked about. I met Cameron Madani, who's my co-founder. He's a video game industry expert. And the other co-founder is Albert Manach. He's an incredible guy. He's considered the father of motion capture. He worked on the Superman and Spider-Man movies, kind of known as
Nice.
the guy in Hollywood who, when you need to do the impossible, you call him. I think it was recently worked on the Avatar films and the underwater scenes. So they're the 3 co-founders. And so when I was talking to Cameron, he started talking to me about all these problems in the video game sector. And as he was saying them, I was thinking to myself, wow, I've solved these problems before. Not in video games, in finance, in human resources, in pharma. These are all very common problems about taking large volumes of data, being able to train them into neural networks, and take sort of tedious manual tasks and automate them and do them with a higher level of precision and much faster. So in the case of NPCX, the problems we're solving are around 2 areas of innovation in video games. The first is around character movement. We're all used to how characters move, and in Unreal 5, if anyone is a video game player and they play with Unreal 5, they'll know that the advances are just amazing in terms of graphics and with graphic cards and GPUs getting more and more powerful. But the characters still move kind of funny, right? We'll get to that in a minute. The other is character intelligence. What we call AI in video games, it turns out it's not artificial intelligence at all. It uses something called decision trees, which are big if-then-else loops. So when you're playing Madden football, and you get to the point where you've played the game for 2 months and you're just tired of playing it because you win the championship every single time because you know exactly what play to call, that's because you're not actually playing against an artificial intelligence. So what NPCX does is we're actually modeling humans, real world players, and not creating godlike AIs that can just beat you every time they play you, because that's sort of what everybody's trying to do these days. They're trying to build these masters of Go or the chess masters, but instead clone people, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but clone people into the game so that we are playing against people who have the same defects and advantages that playing against the player is, to the point where you wouldn't even know you're playing against an NPC, you're playing against a player. So that's what we do. We create more realism and intelligence
Wow.
in the character movement.
Right. And I think that's, a really great intro to the topic that you chose today, which is exactly that, the future of gaming realism, how AI will blur the lines between reality and virtual worlds. And of course, opening up this discussion of how AI technology is creating more interactive and dynamic player experiences, specifically in video games. So as we roll into this, I have to wonder, are there any ethical implications of this, or what might this mean making things more and more human?
Well, there certainly is, especially in the character intelligence area and in the behavioral cloning. So the technology we're using, it's called behavioral cloning. It's also for geeks out there, adversarial networks. And basically what we're doing is we're taking a real world player and we're cloning them to put them into the video game. And I'll give you an example. Let's just say you and I are set to play Call of Duty tonight. At the last minute, you've got a date and you can't get away from that. And you've got to go to dinner. So now I'm stuck. With our technology, what you're going to do is we'll be able to watch you play the game over a series of days. Then we'll be able to take you and actually clone in every situation, right? So you're playing the game. What's your trajectory? What's your wound level? What's your goal? How do you move? Where are your favorite hiding spaces? How do you fire a gun? How do you even move in the game? All those things will turn into facets that we run through these neural networks, create a model of you, put you into the game. Well, now if I want, you can say, Michael, I can't play, but you can play with my clone. And so we go into the game and I'm playing with you and interacting with you every way, but it's not you. So I when it comes to ethics, I think it's really important in AI to be ahead of ethics. We've been moving much faster than ethics in general, and it's time to kind of slow down a little bit, especially with artificial
Isn't that
intelligence.
the curse of humanity in most elements?
It certainly is. I mean, we're putting up cell towers all around us. How do we know, that the radiation levels aren't going to affect us? Or we drive cars, and now that results in accidents every day, and people die from that. A lot of times we make trade-offs, right? Especially new medicine, right? Like experimental medicine. But in the case of AI, it's existential. I mean, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that AI, if we take it down the wrong road, could be a threat to humanity. So, but in this particular case, imagine going into the metaverse and again, I want to talk to you a little bit about the technology because it's really fascinating. But if
Yeah.
you're in the metaverse, and if you go into the metaverse now, and there's been demos of it, people say, "Wow, first of all, the graphics are terrible, and second of all, nobody's there. Who wants to go to a place where nobody is?" Well, if you use a technology like this to clone people, you put them into the game. And by the way, these could be clones of baristas at the bar serving you a coffee. Okay, they don't have to be necessarily video game players. But if you go into an immersive world and now you're surrounded by people, some of them real world people, some of them clones, call them NPCs, and you can't really tell the difference between them. What are the ethics of that? What are the ethics of having you cloned a character and then having it be active when you're not watching it, but yet it's using your name, it's moving like you, and it's taking your actions. So there's a lot of things you just have to think about around that.
Yeah, it is in some ways super interesting and also kind of creepy, like a sort of like a digital fingerprint or something like that, right? You like those ideas of like if there's identical twins and one of them commits a crime, how do you know which one actually did it?
No, well, that's exactly right. But in this case, it could be, a character. There's a player-on-player kill in the game, and maybe it was your clone that did it, right? In that case, it's also interesting from the point of esports players. So we all, a lot of people really admire esports players. If you really want to get better, maybe those esports players could rent you their clone, and you could play against them, really hone your skills, and then you come back to play other people, you can play better, right? But is that ethical, right? Is it ethical to play against people? And so there's a lot of concerns that we have to kind of keep in mind there as we're developing. But there's no holding back this tech at this point. The future of gaming is going to be playing in such an environment that you're not going to be able to tell the difference in terms of the actual movements of the characters, which ones are the humans and which ones are the NPCs. And then if you can clone their personalities, it'll be even more difficult.
Interesting. Jorge, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with Michael. It's very it's an area where we don't really have an intuition on what is ethical and not ethical. It's not very clear exactly how much of a person are you cloning, and is there a point where you've cloned enough that you can say, okay, I need permission from this person every single time I use this thing, or not? It's like, is this distinctive enough and representative enough of the person, of who they are, that that could be something that they could say, hey, I don't feel comfortable with that. And likewise for people playing, it's like, okay, so it's like those people, those clones taught you to play, but in a way, it's like the person's also taught you to play. So do they deserve some of the credit? How do we reward people for doing that kind of stuff? So that, yeah, I think it's a fascinating area. It sort of reminds me a little bit of what's going on with Stable Diffusion and all that. Like they went ahead and used artists' work without asking them, and it's not clear that that's an actual copyright violation, but there are ethical issues around profiting off of others' work, even if you haven't violated copyright.
Yeah,
Because copyright it was never thought to cover this kind of things. So
for sure.
I think that as a society, we're going to need to grapple, because as Michael said, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle, and we're just going to have to grapple with this kind of things going forward.
Yeah, how is this working, Michael? Like, let's two things. Are we getting people's permission? Is that part of the ethics side that you're definitely pushing, making sure that there's full transparency here? And then I guess my second question, and you wanted to touch on this earlier, is the technical side. Like, how are you actually training? Like, what are the models and the training for these human movements? I think it has something to do with motion capture data, or what's that like?
Yeah, well, first I should say this technology is very experimental. No video games are actually using it at the moment. It's something that video games, AAA titles, they have a 3-year life cycle to get from start of development all the way out to video games. So we're talking about the next generation of games, especially in terms of realistic movements and things like that. I do want to say once that comes out, it's going to be impossible to build games without this technology. In other words, once you see a video game where it looks more like you're watching a movie than playing a game because the character movements are so realistic. And I'll give you a really quick example. If you're playing a game like Call of Duty, you see how the characters run, right? They always do this. There's a reason for that. It's because they have a limited amount of animations to choose from, because creating animations is such a tedious process. So that's one of the problems we're solving, by the way. But then they hit a wall, and they're sitting there against the wall, and they're running like this. So what you would see instead would be a character, since it's modeled, the technology is modeled based on motion capture. And for those who don't know what motion capture is, basically they hire real world actors. They put them in suits. The suits have sensors, and they ask them to do a lot of things: climb a wall, climb a ladder, fire a gun, do a somersault, those kinds of things. They take all that sensor information, and then they kind of turn that into animations through a process that they have that we are automating. So instead, if you were using a neural network that modeled that motion capture data, what would happen? The character would be running towards the wall. They would throw up their hands, because you're not going to run face plant into a wall, right? Might bend your knees. So you'll be playing a video game, and the motions would be so realistic, it'd be almost impossible to tell that it's not, you're not, basically, you'd feel like you're playing within a movie, which is, I think, what we're really moving to anyway. Then on the behavioral cloning side, the way that works is we have to watch real world players. So we would say, okay, this game's in beta right now. I want you, Kim, to play this game for about 2 or 3 days, and we're going to observe you. And we're going to put you in a lot of different environments, and all you have to do is play the game. And as you're playing, it's watching what you're doing, and it's going to determine, are you a novice level player? Are you a mid-level player? Are you a veteran player? And after it's done, we can then take all of that, feed it into the neural network, create a model. It's multiple neural networks, feed it into a model of you, and then put it into the game. And then as your clone is playing the game, as it encounters all the different situations that you encountered, it's going to know exactly how to react, including the mistakes that you made. So that's effectively how it works. And it could be done as Kim is in the game now, looks like you, moves like you, acts like you. Is it you? Or it could be just generic novice player, generic, veteran player, because a lot of times in these universes, you need to populate the universe with people. So you'll kind of take a mix of different people and put them in there and throw them. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And I see this as sort of, it's weird to say this, but like gamification within the game, because I can see this as putting, more like level players together, which I imagine being a better experience, you know, not getting my butt kicked every time or being bored out of my mind because these people suck. Sort of like keeping the, you know, the green circle skiers on this route and the black diamond skiers on that one. And then as you improve, right, you can be matched accordingly. And I think it might be also interesting if you're, what about the uses of watching my own clone to improve myself? Like, I know that sometimes, for example, if I watch back a dojolive video, I'm like, oh gosh, I maybe shouldn't do that, or I like that I do this. And are people able to maybe learn from this experience themselves and as a way to improve?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the last neural network that we're planning to use. It's reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning is it's sort of like how you teach a dog. So you have a treat and you want the dog to play dead, but you can't just say play dead. That's impossible. So first you have to teach it to sit or lay down, and then if it doesn't get laid down, it's not getting the treat. So every time it gets a treat, you're giving it. Every time it lays down, you're giving it a treat. Now you have to teach it not just lay down, but roll over, then stick its tongue out, stick its arms out. And so basically that's how it is. Every time your clone's doing something that makes sense, we're continuing, and it's kind of there's negative reinforcement too. Every time it does something that's wrong, you're saying that's wrong, and then it learns from that and it gets better. And that's one of kind of the tenets of reinforcement learning, and it's really powerful.
Yeah, it's super, super fun. I think this just really excites me, and I'm not even a gamer, but like what you're saying in terms of the experience, like I'm a mom, and I've also been around in a Toy Story Pixar fan since the 90s when it first started. And I think it's funny because while the first Toy Story, for example, is an amazing story and it's still super fun to watch, I watch that and I see the animation and I'm like, oh, it actually kind of hurts. and then you watch, the latest, which I think is Toy Story 4, and it's like amazing, right? And the difference that has happened. And so to watch this progression over time and what that might even mean for video games. And I think you're onto something with the movement, because I think in terms of graphics, we're kind of already, how much better can we get, right? Because we're already seeing pores in people's skin and fuzz on the peaches and whatever else, right? So I think this is maybe the last frontier in terms of hyper realism.
I would say movement and facial expressions. If you ever zoom in close in some of these characters in the video games, the facial expressions are really limited. There's probably like 5 that they have, and they're really stiff. But we're getting to the point again. NPCX is a product that we're building called FacialX, where it does the same thing. It's modeling, thousands of different types of facial expressions, and so what you'll start to get is, again, really realistic, where the facial expressions really match up with what the character's feeling based on sentiment analysis, which is another component in artificial intelligence, but then also that the movements align, making it really realistic. But going back to what you were saying before, if you were a novice player and somebody keeps kicking your butt, you could play a co-op game and just invite one of those esports clones to play next to you, and then suddenly you're matched up pretty evenly, right? So yeah, it's a way of, and you were also talking about how you can get bored of a game. I think one of the interesting applications of this technology is that, like we were talking about the Madden universe, where you learn how to play the game in 2 months and you get bored of it. If you have AIs that aren't godlike AIs, but they're not decision trees either, they're based on how humans play and how humans learn, you won't ever get bored of that game, because it's like you're playing against another player every time, right? Players learn, they get better, they do smart things, they're dynamic. Because let's be honest, humans don't have decision trees in their head. We have synapses and brains. So when you talk about neural networks, you're really trying to simulate the way a brain works.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, particularly for Madden, because suddenly it goes from, okay, you're only taking right now the likeness of the players, and like the players are all this big thing, but now you can sort of take the likeness of the coaches, like the actual thing they do on the field.
Yeah, that's right.
Or off the field, but now you can learn from what they choose, and then you can tell people, hey, now is your turn to play against a real NFL coach. And I think that would be a pretty amazing experience.
Or even just the emotional state that we experience as humans. Like, I mean, sometimes you can do something and you're like really into it and like taking it seriously, and then there's other times like I don't really care that much, or maybe you're tired, or perhaps you're like, you know what, screw it, I don't care if I die today. Right? And so are we able to even is that part of this behavioral mapping that we're noticing? Because we're not consistent all the time, right?
Yeah, the neural network at the end of the day is going to model exactly how you play in the game. So if you play fearless and run right into the charge, that's what your clone's going to do. And if you're afraid of being killed in the game, maybe you'll lose all your gold or whatever it is, then it's going to play cautiously. It's really going to be you in just about every way. And it's one of those things in machine learning, you'll understand this, Jorge. The more data you have, the more clear it is. It's not like when they're doing a presidential poll, it always blows my mind because they can talk to 1,000 people and get within what, like a percentage point of accuracy and how the election's going to go. Blows my mind, right? But statistics works that way, but machine learning does not work that way. You want as many edge cases as possible. You want as much data as possible. So to get the most realistic clone possible, I want to watch you playing the game for 5 days, 10 days, a week, and people play games quite a lot. So as long as they're willing to contribute, we can make a more and more accurate clone.
Really, really interesting. I want to kind of bring in, you mentioned AI, we mentioned this not going back in the bottle and a lot of different facets. And there's this trend going around, everybody knows about it. What is it? Chat GPT.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Bard now, by the way, which was released yesterday.
Okay. And so what does this imply? What's your take on this, Michael, Jorge? Let's talk.
Well, I'll start, Jorge, and I'd love to hear your opinion as well. I don't think we appreciate how much of a game changer that ChatGPT really is. So Bill Gates was interviewed this week, and he wrote a blog post, and he said there's only been two real revolutionary changes in technology over the last 50 years, and he said the first one was personal computing, and the second is AI, and it was driven by his first interaction with ChatGPT. And because there's been so many advances, you can go back to the microprocessor, the internet, so many different things. But he thinks it's personal computers and it's artificial intelligence. So, ChatGPT can do things beyond what any language model that I've ever built. Remember, that's my background. I've got patents in that area. I've written scientific papers about, so that's my background, and I'm impressed. So if someone like me is impressed, that says something. The thing that I think is really interesting about it, though, is how it's destroying businesses by accident. So I'll give you an example. There used to be these companies out there, and I won't name any names, but they charged $250,000, $300,000 a year for their software. And what their software did was it took unstructured data, which was basically big blobs of text. Let's say a Microsoft Word document that you're working on. It allowed you to take it and then run it through a classification engine. And then what would come back is a series of topics that paper is about. So in other words, I could give it 2 pages, and it would come back to me. This is about science, biological science, biochemistry, I'll give you like 6 things. Turns out is really useful for empowering search and some other things. People paid big money for that. So ChatGPT comes out. It's really conversational. It's about advancing humanity and being able to help people answer questions. And so I ask it. I say, hey, ChatGPT, here's a document. Can you use the Library of Congress and give me like 6 topical areas that this is about? Sure, Michael. ... Amazing level of precision. So it literally destroyed an entire, and by the way, there wasn't just one company. There was scores of companies that was working on that. It took one industry and completely destroyed it completely by accident. And I would say that's not an edge case. I'd say there's probably 20 or 30 different industries. So there's an opportunity with ChatGPT right now because it's a great API and it's low cost access for the API to build a number of different products around it that are complete game changers that were hard to do before that are now easy.
Yeah, I agree with Michael. It's one of those technologies where the first thing you see is you go like, wow. And they go like, well, it's not perfect. And it hallucinates sometimes and it doesn't have the right reference other times. And it's like, it's cool. But then you sit down and think, okay, but what can we actually build on top of this? What does this allow us to do now that we couldn't do before? How does this accelerate things that used to be just a little bit too slow for them to be businesses? And that's where the big changes are going to come.
Yeah,
it's like all those things which are like not the immediate thing, but what's going to grow around it that are really going to be revolutionary.
Yeah, it reminds me, I haven't even finished the series, but the series Silicon Valley, right? He starts out with like the ability to compress like music or something, and then all these other companies are just like, "Oh my God, the potential here!" And that's kind of what I hear you talking about, Jorge.
I call these 2-day products, because these are products, a lot of them that would have taken months and months to build. You would have to go out and raise capital. Now you could literally build them in 2 days. So that's the positive. The positive, we can innovate really quickly now. We could build all these new products so quickly. What's the disadvantage? Barrier to entry. If I could build this product in 2 days, and so can Jorge. So what's my barrier to entry now, right? Uh, so you need to find some way to actually enhance it with other technology, I think, to make it useful and monetize it. But for humanity, it's an enormous leap forward. There's people now, they've connected it to Siri. So I see people walking around the street, tell me about Alexander the Great, and they're getting back, responses just walking around. It's just unbelievable.
Super
Yeah,
fun.
it's like Google and asteroids in many
Yeah, yeah,
ways,
yeah, yeah.
and it just like one of the things that struck me is I was reading this article the other day, and it was like, okay, so our professor wanted us to use this thing for, and I think it wasn't even the newest version; it was the original ChatGPT. It wasn't ChatGPT. It wasn't GPT-4. It was like they wanted to use this for this class, and the class, the feature that it had, it wasn't cybersecurity, was that there were people who were like they already knew, they were practitioners, they were professionals, and there were people who were totally new. And the people that were totally new were able to keep up with the experts because they had ChatGPT explaining stuff to them during class. That kind
Yeah.
of thing, where you can have people who are novices keeping up with experts, that's so empowering for so many people. It's really going to change how people learn, how we credential people, what we expect out of people with their performance at their jobs. It's going to be a total game changer. And I think that right now we're just not seeing how much. It's like we are not able to see just how much of an impact it's going to have because it's going to start trickling down bit by bit, and we're going to be sort of like the frog that got boiled. And 10 years from now, we're going to look back and go like, wow, how much have things changed?
Yeah, that's
Hmm.
right. I mean, you think about it, it's already even happened. It's hard to envision what life was like in 2010, let alone 2000, or when I kind of broke into the industry, which is in the mid 1990s. Technology is advancing. This is why you bring it back to ethics, Kim, and you know what you said at the outset. With artificial intelligence, I think every company like ours has a responsibility to have somebody have an AI ethics council, to have somebody on board who's charged with that. Take that very seriously, because what are the ethics of cloning people? I mean, profound, right? And if you rush forward into it and deal with the problems later, you're going to have problems. And it just with artificial intelligence, it goes across the board. I can just start
Mhm.
spouting out the different issues that are going to come up.
For
Yeah,
sure. And I would
like you
say the
mentioned,
flip
sorry,
side, sorry,
Kim,
I was just gonna say, I say the flip side is also on the users. Like it's on us, I think, to just continuously at least have awareness, to demand transparency, and to have, beyond that, demand a way to speak up, that there's a way for us to be able to communicate directly and say, I'm not okay with this, or this is, or these suggestions, this open dialogue. I think for us, I think as humanity, to not just be complacent and like, oh, they'll take care of it, it's fine. To not just be so enthralled by this cool tech, but to also take that ownership and empower ourselves to have a voice continuously throughout all of this.
Wait, you know
yeah,
what
I
else, Kim?
agree with Kim.
Sorry, go
And
ahead, Jorge.
Michael, I wanted to touch on the point you said about cars. It's like cars change the way we build our cities. Cars change the way we lead our lives.
Yeah,
AI is going to do the same. And I think we are all aware of what cars did. And like Kim said, at this point, is like we gotta, as a species, sort of grow up and realize, hey, these things we can do can actually affect us really, really profoundly. We've already seen it happen once. Now we know what we need to do, how to manage this responsibly, and then it's up to every single one of us to like raise our voices and ask for that to happen. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
well, Google Maps is a great example of that. In Waze, that's artificial intelligence. When it's trying to take you to your route, How many people do you know now could find their way around in a new city without GPS technology? Almost nobody. But in 1995, you had to pull out a map and figure it out. So
We
I think
don't
it's
even have access to the maps for starters. Like maybe we could if there was a physical map available to us, but they're not even made anymore.
no, nobody even makes them anymore, right? So it touches our lives in ways that sometimes we don't even realize, and then absorbs and becomes part of our everyday life. What I was going to say, Kim, is that I think backwards traceability is a really important topic in AI. In other words, AI is making lots and lots of decisions, and it's not like a big if then else loop, a decision tree back in the day where we could say, oh, it did this because of that. And neural networks make decisions, and they could hardly, you can ask ChatGPT sometimes why it made a certain decision, and it can't even tell you why. So I'll give you a great example. We have a customer at a different company of mine. They're in the HR space, and they said, build an algorithm that can tell us which people are most likely to quit so that we can, kind of focus on them and we're focus on our culture. And it kept picking women in their late 20s. I was like, what's going on with this thing? So we're doing back, we're trying to figure out what was happening with the network, making changes. It kept picking women. Turned out it was picking women because that's when a lot of women go on maternity leave. Well, that's obviously not, that's a huge ethical issue. You can't single out women just because they're going to get pregnant and go out on maternity leave. So I think it's important for us to know not only the decisions that are being made, but why the AI has to in every case be programmed in a way that can tell us why it's making those decisions, so that we can start to weed out the unethical decisions.
Right. I think that's a really great point. And in that case, it would continue to be different from us as people, because many times we make decisions and we don't have a freaking clue why. Like, right? We can't explain
That's
it.
true.
But I think it's important that you're right,
Sure.
that a machine can. And that's one of those perhaps key distinguishing features of how this can stay within our control. Well, Michael, we've come to the end of our half hour today. It's been a fantastic half hour with you. I feel like we could go on for another half hour,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4. But unfortunately, we are unable to do that. Thank you so much for joining us. Any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share today before we say goodbye?
Well, just that this presents artificial intelligence in general presents an amazing opportunity for all of us. It's the 2-day products that I mentioned. I think whether you're, with whatever social class you're from, whatever level of education you have, there's an opportunity now to do this. You don't need to be a data scientist. You don't need to be a programmer. Get your hands dirty, pursue your dreams, and this is one of the very few times that we're going to have in our lifetimes that we can make such great leaps. So embrace those.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us. Jorge, thank you for your expertise on
Thank
today's
you
show
for
as
having
well.
me.
Nothing but success to you and MPCX, Michael.
Yeah.
Stick around as we go off air here in just a moment. But I encourage our viewers to join us on Monday for our recap show, where we talk about Michael's show as well as Amit's show and introduce you to what we've got coming up next week. Until then, stay safe, everyone, and see you soon.